Unlock your fitness journey. Master resistance bands at home. She stared at the colorful bands sitting in the corner of her bedroom, still wrapped in their packaging. 3 months they'd been there, 3 months of good intentions gathering dust. Outside her window, the world was waking up, and she wondered if today would be different. Most mornings felt the same. That familiar weight of knowing she should move, should start, should finally become the person she kept promising to be. But gyms felt intimidating. Equipment felt expensive. And honestly, the thought of being watched while figuring it all out made her stomach turn. What she didn't know yet was that those simple bands would become her quiet revolution. Resistance training has this reputation: heavy weights, loud gyms, people who already look like they've figured everything out. For years, she believed fitness had a specific look, a specific place, a specific price tag. She thought transformation required suffering in public, under fluorescent lights, surrounded by mirrors that seemed to magnify every insecurity. But something shifted that Tuesday morning. Maybe it was the article she'd read about home workouts. Maybe it was seeing her reflection and feeling disconnected from the person looking back. Or maybe she was just tired of waiting for the perfect moment that never came. She opened the package. The bands felt lighter than she expected, almost too simple to work. Part of her wondered if she'd wasted money on something that couldn't possibly replace real equipment. The skepticism sat heavy in her chest as she unrolled the first band and held it between her hands. Then she pulled. That initial resistance surprised her. Not painful, but present, like the band was asking her body to wake up, to remember what strength felt like. She looped it around her feet and tried a simple row, pulling the handles toward her chest. Her shoulders engaged, her back muscles activated in ways they hadn't in years. Something about it felt right. Researchers at the American Council on Exercise discovered something fascinating about resistance bands. When they compared traditional weight training to band-based exercises, they found muscle activation rates were nearly identical. Sometimes even higher with bands because of the variable resistance throughout each movement. Your muscles don't just work at one point in the exercise. They're engaged the entire time, fighting that elastic tension from start to finish. She didn't know the science then, she just knew it felt good. The first week was clumsy. She'd watch a video, pause it 17 times, rewind to check her form. Her arms would shake during simple bicep curls. Her legs would tremble through squats. Some days she'd only manage 10 minutes before exhaustion won. Other days she'd surprise herself with 20. But what struck her most wasn't the physical challenge, it was the privacy. No one watching, no judgment, no comparing herself to the person on the machine next to her, who seemed to float through exercises she could barely start. Just her, the bands, and the slow discovery of what her body could do. Progress didn't announce itself with fireworks. 3 weeks in, she noticed her posture had changed. She'd catch her reflection in passing and see her shoulders pulled back, her spine straighter. The chronic ache between her shoulder blades that had become background noise started to fade. Small things, carrying groceries, reaching for high shelves, playing with her nephew, all felt easier somehow. She thought she was chasing aesthetic change. What she found instead was functional freedom. Most people underestimate resistance bands because they associate resistance with weight. If it's not heavy iron plates, it can't be real training, right? But resistance isn't about weight, it's about tension, and bands provide something unique. They create more resistance as you stretch them further, meaning the hardest part of each movement gets the most challenge, precisely when your muscles are strongest. One morning, about 6 weeks into her routine, she tried something she hadn't attempted in years. A full push-up, not from her knees, but toes to chest, lowering herself with control and pressing back up. Her arms shook, her core burned. But she did it. Then she did another. She laughed out loud, alone in her living room, because she'd forgotten how good it felt to exceed your own expectations. To surprise yourself with capability you didn't know you'd built. The bands hadn't done push-ups for her, but they'd strengthened every muscle group involved, quietly preparing her body for that moment. This is what consistency looks like when it's sustainable. The beauty of band training isn't just the physical adaptation, it's the psychological shift. When fitness becomes accessible, when you can train in your pajamas before coffee, when you don't need to commute or pay monthly fees or worry about childcare or parking, suddenly the barriers that felt insurmountable start to dissolve. Researchers at Stanford found that when people remove friction from positive behaviors, adherence rates increase by more than 40%. She was becoming proof of that data. Around month 3, she started experimenting. She'd learned the basic movements: rows, chest presses, squats, shoulder raises. Now she began combining them, creating circuits that made her breathe hard and sweat through her shirt. She'd anchor a band to her door and do face pulls for her posterior deltoids. She'd stand on a band and press overhead until her arms trembled. Each session felt like a conversation with her body. What feels strong today? What needs attention? Where's the tightness, the weakness, the potential? Some days were frustrating. There were mornings when motivation felt like a distant concept, when her body felt heavy and resistant. She'd go through the motions, do half the routine, feel disappointed in herself. But then she'd remember something important. Showing up imperfectly is still showing up. This wasn't about perfection. It never was. What surprised her most about her experience with resistance bands wasn't just how they transformed her physical strength, but how everything started to feel different once she switched to training at home with the right equipment. She wasn't expecting such a clear change in her consistency, her confidence, her entire relationship with movement. And honestly, she tested different approaches more than a few times before she figured out what really worked for her lifestyle and goals. This isn't a promotion, just sharing real results that made a noticeable difference in how she approached fitness. She'll leave information below for anyone curious about building their own home resistance training setup. But the transformation extended beyond muscle. 5 months into her practice, she noticed she stood differently in meetings, spoke with more certainty, made decisions with less second-guessing. It wasn't that the bands had magically fixed her life, but the daily practice of choosing herself, of following through on a commitment when no one was watching, that discipline rippled outward into everything else. Psychologists call this self-efficacy, the belief in your own capability. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you build evidence that you're trustworthy, that you're capable, that when you say you'll do something, you do it. And that quiet confidence changes how you move through the world. She remembered the woman who'd stared at those bands 3 months earlier, wrapped in their packaging, heavy with doubt. If she could go back and tell that version of herself anything, it would be this: the hardest rep is always the first one. Not the physical movement, the decision to begin when you don't yet believe in the outcome. Her routine became sacred, not in some spiritual, performative way, but in the sense that it was hers. 30 minutes most mornings, sometimes less, occasionally more. No one photographing her for social media. No one tracking her metrics or comparing her to anyone else. Just consistent, private dedication to becoming a little stronger than yesterday. The bands themselves held up remarkably well. Unlike dumbbells that stayed the same weight forever, she could increase resistance by adjusting her grip, changing her stance, or graduating to thicker bands. The entire set cost less than 2 months of gym membership, took up less space than a shoebox, and traveled with her everywhere. Physical therapists have known about resistance bands for decades. They use them in rehabilitation because they're joint-friendly, they allow for natural movement patterns, and they reduce injury risk compared to free weights for people relearning movement or building foundational strength. What was once a clinical tool has become a revolution in accessible fitness. She was part of that revolution now. By month 7, her body had changed in ways she'd stopped expecting. Not the dramatic before and after transformation that fitness culture sells, but something more subtle and sustainable. Her jeans fit differently. Her arms showed definition when she reached for things. Her legs had shape and strength that made stairs feel effortless. But the real transformation was internal. She'd rewired the story she told herself about who she was and what she was capable of. The narrative had shifted from "I should work out" to "I'm someone who trains," from obligation to identity. That shift made all the difference. Sometimes, we only understand our own strength when we give it space to emerge quietly. One Saturday morning, her nephew asked if she was strong. She smiled and handed him a resistance band, showed him how to loop it under his feet and curl it toward his shoulders. His face lit up when he felt the resistance, the challenge, the engagement of muscles he'd never noticed before. She saw in his eyes the same spark she'd felt that first Tuesday morning. Strength isn't just physical. It's the courage to start when you don't know if you'll succeed. It's the persistence to continue when progress feels invisible. It's the wisdom to celebrate small victories. An extra rep, better form, showing up when you'd rather stay in bed. All of it counts. All of it builds. She thought about all the women who'd feel intimidated by traditional gyms, who'd convinced themselves fitness wasn't for them because they didn't fit the image sold by the industry. She wanted to tell them what she'd learned. Your journey doesn't have to look like anyone else's. It doesn't require expensive equipment or public performance or a body that already looks a certain way. It just requires beginning. The Centers for Disease Control recommends at least 2 days per week of muscle strengthening activities for all major muscle groups. Not for aesthetics, though that's a nice side effect, but for bone density, metabolic health, injury prevention, and functional independence as we age. Resistance training is one of the most valuable investments you can make in your long-term health. She'd become living proof of that recommendation. When she looked in the mirror now, it wasn't her reflection that had changed most dramatically. It was what she believed about herself. The doubt that used to cloud her vision had lifted. She saw someone capable, someone disciplined, someone who kept promises to herself even when they were hard. The bands still sat in the corner of her bedroom, but now they were unwrapped, well-used, essential. They'd witnessed her transformation from skepticism to confidence, from inconsistency to ritual, from wishful thinking to embodied strength. They were tools, yes, but they'd also been witnesses to her becoming. This is what sustainable transformation looks like. Not a finish line, but a practice. Not perfection, but persistent, imperfect action. Not waiting until you feel ready, but starting and discovering readiness along the way. Tell us what part of this story resonated most with you, and which country or city you're watching from. Maybe you're where she was 7 months ago, staring at equipment and wondering if today's the day. Maybe you're further along, celebrating your own quiet victories. Wherever you are, you're exactly where you need to be. See you in the next video. Bye.